Like many, I have had a lifelong passion in NASCAR racing. I took that passion as a kid and moved down south to find a career working on race cars. And that passion began as a 5-year-old kid in Maine, watching races on Sunday with my dad and or grandfather. Plus, receiving diecasts as birthday and Christmas presents. Like most 5-year-olds who loved racing, I loved the colorful cars. Of course, I was a big fan of Jeff Gordon and his Rainbow Warriors, but other cars stood out to me, and I loved them. Chad Little's John Deere Green was a favorite of mine, as well as those Cartoon Network Wacky racing cars. Ricky Rudd's bright orange Tide Ride was consistently at the front of my living room rug races, but one car in particular stood out above all the rest, the number 35 Tabasco Pontiac. I loved that car. The logo design integrated into the hood, the bright popping orange and reds, and oh boy, them flames. But as much as I loved that car as a little kid, it was seemingly missing from everything that I saw within the sport at the time. Books, TV, magazines, what little internet connection that I had access to at the time. I never really heard anything about that good-looking car. In fact, it wasn't until my internet digging years as a junior high student, hours upon hours of Wikipedia, Google Video, early YouTube, and just Google image searching, I stumbled upon that 35 car again. Turns out, Todd Bodine had driven it, and he didn't do too well, and was let go. And apparently Tabasco had left the sport shortly after. A mere footnote in the history of the sport. But after some time, I learned there was so much more to the story. Over the years, the car and team had gained notoriety for the events that surrounded them. They were known as the Tabasco Fiasco. The story starts in 1997. Businessman Bob Hancher of Indiana owns a team known as ISM Racing and the newly formed Indy Racing League. Running a limited schedule with former Supercross ace Jeff Ward, the duo pull off a surprise third-place run at the biggest race of the year, and possibly the world, the Indianapolis 500. This, of course, leads for plans for a full-time championship run in 1998. But Mr. Bob Hancher isn't quite done with those ambitions. He wants to go NASCAR racing. By late 1997, NASCAR is on the up and up, a rapidly growing sport. NASCAR gets the deal of a lifetime when IndyCar racing splits into two separate divisions and a very messy and well-covered political spat. Throughout the 1990s, stock car racing, led by NASCAR, has found monumental growth in popularity. Fortune 500 companies want a part of the action. They see millions of eyes watching these 180-mile-an-hour billboards with pure, raw passion. Hancher lands a deal with the McIlhenny Company, the makers of the famous Tabasco hot sauce, arguably the biggest hot sauce brand in the country. The driver? Why, the youngest brother of the famous Bodine racing family from upstate New York, Todd. While Jeff and Brett have enjoyed long and relatively successful careers at the highest level, Todd is still trying to get his big break in Cup. He had a 2.5-year stint with Butch Mock's number 75 a few years prior, but they often struggled to get past the mid-pack. In 1996, he quote-unquote goes back down to the Busch Series, but he proves he still has what it takes there. He finishes in third in point after one win. In 1997, he moves back to longtime friend Frank Cece's Team 34 and garners one win and finishes second in points. Meanwhile, he becomes Cup's latest super sub, filling in those couple years for Bill Elliott, Ricky Craven, and even his older brother Jeff from time to time. At Watkins Glen in 1997, he wins his first Cup Series pole at his home track in Watkins Glen in a one-off deal with his Busch team. The guy certainly has paid his dues again, and seems to be an easy choice to promote to the Cup Series. In October of 1997, ISM, Tabasco, and Mr. Todd the Onion Bodine announced their intentions to run full-time for the 1998 Winston Cup. Supposedly, and I'm going off of forum comments here, this is a 3-year deal. Huge at the time. They poach crew chief Pat Trison from his older brother Jeffrey's team. They show off a beautiful brand new Pontiac Grand Prix and make their debut at NASCAR's home, Charlotte Motor Speedway. After the rookie team finishes 25th in debut, not bad, they finished the year off at Atlanta Motor Speedway in the final race of the year with a DNQ. Could this possibly be an omen? We shall see. Despite this, the team and Tabasco are marketed everywhere. They will be a force to be reckoned with in 1998. The McElhenney Company buys TV time with a very clever Super Bowl ad, and they are predicted in the official NASCAR preview and press guide as one of the hottest teams of the 1998 season. And they bring a great big tent and display to the fan zone for the Daytona 500. Due to Todd's surprise pole the year before, they were given a berth in 1998's Budweiser Shootout. Running a special bottle paint scheme, they finished 10th in the 25-lap exhibition race. But they have their work cut out for them for the biggest race of the year, as a very large field of 56 cars are trying to make NASCAR's biggest race of the year. Texan Bobby Labonte wins the pole in his Interstate Batteries Pontiac with a blistering 192.415 miles an hour. Todd, meanwhile, qualifies at 185 miles per hour, only good enough to place 50th out of the 56 cars. He'll have to race his way in on Thursday. Thursday rolls around. The Gatorade Twin 125s are the rookie team's only shot now. Tabasco gets them an in-car camera and plenty of TV time for Sunday's tape-delayed coverage of the race. Todd, as does many others, needs to finish 15th to get into the Great American Race. However, disaster strikes on lap 33. Rookie Kenny Irwin Jr., making his debut in Robert Yates' number 28 Ford, hits the wall coming out of turn 2, comes down and collects Todd. Out of control, Todd spins back into Kenny's car before it straightens back up. But the nose and right side are tore up. They work on the car, but it's wounded. He stays on the lead lap, but he can't stay in the draft. And despite late race cautions involving Dan Pardis, former Busch Series champion Steve Grissom, and a very hard crash involving Johnny Benson and Kenny Schrader, it's not enough. He finishes outside the cutoff, and he misses the Great American Race. With that disappointment behind them, they show at their North Carolina Speedway in Rockingham, North Carolina, and they miss the race. They pack up and drive over 2,100 miles to Las Vegas, Nevada, and miss the race. A disastrous start, nonetheless. But Tabasco was undeterred. They had a lot of money invested in their marketing with the team and Todd, so they weren't really worried about the results right off the bat. They knew it was kind of going to be a struggle, but they had some confidence in them. Heck, they even put out a NASCAR cookbook with Todd featured prominently in it. And their patience will pay off.
Back at Atlanta Motor Speedway, where Bud Pole qualifying continues. Here's a team that has struggled greatly during 1998. They have not made a single race yet, certainly not because they haven't worked hard and because they haven't got a good driver, because Todd Bodine is. They just haven't put the combination together yet.
Failed to qualify for his first 3 races this year. And in practice this morning, it wasn't very good.
No, he wasn't very good. He was about 40th fastest. Here he comes to the corner. And don't you know, everybody on this, Pat Trison, Todd Bodine, everybody on this team right now is praying.
Whoa.
Praying for a lap.
Look at that.
Oh,
Look
man.
at that.
He is in.
Way to go, Todd. 28.749, a 192.841. Where in the world did that speed come from?
Wow. Did he pick up or what?
What, about a second? He picked up more than a second.
Down to Jerry. What does Pat think about this, Doc?
Pat, how about that lap? Incredible lap for you guys. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's great. As all the driver, we had a little problem with a fuel pickup problem this morning. We fixed it right before qualifying, and he didn't get a lot of practice, but he cut a heck of a lap, and we're just real happy to be in, hopefully, here when it's all over with.
It may not be the pole, but go up and give your driver a hug and celebrate. Congratulations.
Thanks, Jerry.
Pat Trison, the Tabasco Pontiac, is in the field. They're going to go up and celebrate. Let's check in with Bill.
Outside pole. Second place qualifying position. And to prove the qualifying run wasn't a one-lap thing, to proceed to run inside the top 10 all day long before engine issues dropped them back to 10th. But maybe it was a fluke, as Todd barely qualifies at Darlington and finishes way back at the pack at 27th. And then he finishes 29th at Bristol after an early crash with Ted Musgrave. Texas is the 7th race of the season, and he misses that race. And that was pretty much how the team would perform. Run mid-pack, or back a pack, or miss the race. A practice crash and injury at California led to Wally Dallenbach Jr. to drive the car during the race. A DNQ at Talladega. A crash late in the Coca-Cola 600. A DNQ at Dover. Another crash, although none of his doing, at Richmond. Another DNQ at Michigan. A 22nd place finish at Pocono after starting shotgun on the field. And one last DNQ at Sears Point. Mr. Bob Hancher had enough. Something had to change. And the easiest thing to change in the eyes of the owner was the driver. So, the onion was let go. But it didn't take long before he found two rides, finishing out the year driving for old friend CC in the Busch Series, and Little Joe Falk's number 91 car in Cup. Mr. Bob Hancher had intended on running series veteran and former Daytona 500 pole winner Wally Allen Jr. to drive when they returned to Daytona. But the wildfires in the area had postponed that event for October. Reportedly, Dallenbach, who himself had been fired from his Sabco ride a lot earlier in the season, was offered a 5-race deal to drive the number 35. Reportedly, Wally turned it down. At Loudon, they put in struggling Gary Bradbury, who was having another torrid season in his number 78 Pilot Travel Centers Ford. He made the race and blew the engine up just before halfway. Veteran Jimmy Horton was given a shot at Pocono, and he missed the race. And now, our story brings us to Darrell Waltrip and Tim Beverly. Old DW, on the downswing of his career, had lost longtime sponsor Western Auto during the offseason. He signed sponsors Speedblock and the struggling big box hardware store Builder Square as replacements. But, surprisingly, they failed to meet sponsor obligations, and DW canceled the contract earlier in the season. He sold the team to jet plane mogul Tim Beverly, and he went on the sub for injured Steve Park at Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. Why do these two come into play now? Because Hancher, tired of his struggles in the Winston Cup Series, took his ball, cashed out, and went home. He had sold the team to Beverly just before Indianapolis. However, Mr. Hancher failed to tell Tabasco this. So imagine their surprise when Beverly shows up at Indianapolis with a Chevrolet. Beverly, seeing the number 35 team's Pontiacs as part of the problem, decided to use one of DW's Chevrolets instead. Other than it being a different make, the paint scheme was exactly the same. With Beverly's crew chief Phil Hammer now leading the charge, they promptly finished 13th in their debut with DW. But Tabasco was not happy. They had lost the driver they invested heavily in, and now the team has bailed on the Pontiac Grand Prix they were promoting heavily in all their advertising. Despite the immediate result in the Chevrolet, it was not the Pontiac they invested in. Now, Tabasco and the McElhenney Company had every right to be pissed. All this behind-the-scenes stuff was going on without their knowledge. The team even had a new name, Tyler Jet Motorsports. They learned this at the racetrack. They proceeded to bring about lawsuits to Hancher and the newly coined team. So, Waltrip and Beverly, looking to avoid the mess that they had bought themselves into, returned to running the Pontiacs 2 races later at Michigan. Luckily, they had DW's past champions provisional to fall back on, as they would then proceed to use it and qualify dead last in all but 2 of the remaining races. Results also struggled, as he would have one more top 20 at Richmond to round out the year. At the end of the year, the hot sauce giants tucked their tails between their legs and left the sport, never to be seen again. Which is a shame. This was a pretty big company that wanted to support the sport despite the lack of on-track results. They saw the value in the marketing at the time and invested heavily in having Todd Bodine as the driver of their number 35 Pontiacs. That speaks volumes. If the behind-the-scenes stuff wasn't such a mess and Bodine was able to stay, maybe they would have stuck around for a lot longer. It was certainly a hot-looking race car, and it's a shame that it's mostly been forgotten to history as this famous fiasco. As for Mr. Hancher and ISM, the IRL team went back to running part-time in 1999 because, turns out, Tabasco also sponsored that car, and they had no real replacement for it. And then they proceeded to shut down in July of that year. Then, Mr. Hancher seemingly disappeared from the public eye. But boy, he was busy. Being a scummy businessman. In 2013, he was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for misappropriating funds of 2 separate companies. From 2005 to 2010, he took money from investors for a contracting company that he was supposed to use in public stock offerings. He pocketed a bunch of that money. He pulled a very similar stunt in late 2009 to an ATV parts company where he walked out with over $500,000. He is currently sitting in federal prison without parole, which makes the strife between his decision-making and Tabasco's contracts all the more interested. As for the other players in this story, Todd Bodine will go on to have 2 more successful years driving for Frank Cece in the Busch Series. Driving a pretty sharp-looking number 66 Phillips 66 Chevrolet. Get it? He'd finish 4th in points both years and get a win at Michigan in 2000. Beverly and Tyler Jet Motorsports would hire Wisconsin short-track veteran Rich Bickle for 1999. And they brought another sharp-looking race car. Now the newly renumbered number 45 to reflect new sponsor 10-10-345 Lucky Dog. This was a dial-around long-distance service provider provided by AT&T. And you can't really argue that those purple Pontiacs looked pretty good. However, the team would only last through the middle part of 2000, though, after another sponsor, this time Lycos, failed to pay and forcing them to sell the team to fellow Pontiac team MB2 Motorsports. DW would go on to sign a 2-year deal to drive Travis Carter's new second team, but that team would face horrific results as it operated as a separate entity from Travis's original team, driven by Jimmy Spencer. And trust me, this is a story for another time. When DW retired at the end of 2000, his replacement was none other than Todd the Onion Bodine. And this brings us to the end of the first of Wookie's Racing Stories. Bit of some different content for me, but it was a pretty fun video to make. I've always been interested in old race teams, and I just absolutely love researching this kind of stuff. There will be an audio version of this uploaded on my podcast, Wookie's Automotive Racing Ramblin' Podcasts. Links to Shout Engine and iTunes in the description. If you like the video, give it a like. Not a lick, a like. Give the channel a sub, and check out the Wookie Automotive Facebook page for updates. Of course, check out the Wookie Automotive Racing Ramblin' Podcasts, as during the race season, I go over every race and what else goes on in the racing world. Anyways, it's been fun. Here's hoping we see another fantastic looking Tabasco hot sauce car in the sport in the future, but I seriously doubt it. Anyways, keep your ear out for more of these stories, and have a good night.